Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a historical analysis that really challenges the standard narrative on how modern South Korea and its alliance with the United States came to be.
So, let's start with the big question. How did South Korea become such a crucial U.S. ally in the Cold War? Now, many of us probably know the familiar story, a democracy saved from communism. But the source material for this explainer, an article called U.S. Imperialism and the Fascist Puppet State in South Korea, it paints a very different picture.
And this quote right here? This is the core argument of the article. It's intense. It reframes that entire period not as nation-building, but as the violent destruction of a popular, socialist-leaning movement, all with the backing of the United States. Okay, let's really dig into this.
First up, the years right after World War II. According to this article, the end of Japanese rule in 1945 didn't bring freedom. Oh no. Instead, it kicked off a massive struggle between two totally opposite visions for what Korea should become.
So on one side, the article says you had these grassroots people's committees popping up all over the country. They had huge popular support and wanted an independent socialist Korea. But then, in comes the U.S. military occupation. And their vision? Well, it was the exact opposite. The source claims the U.S. flat-out refused to recognize these committees, and get this, it says they instead empowered the very same officials who had just collaborated with the Japanese because they were seen as reliable anti-communists.
In this timeline, based on the source, it lays out what it calls a systematic campaign to crush that popular vision. The article alleges the U.S. military government used force, we're talking tanks and police, to break a huge general strike, then outlawed leftist parties, and finally orchestrated a separate election in the South to install their guy, the hardcore anti-communist Syngman Rhee.
Okay, so with a U.S.-backed state now in place, the article argues that political suppression ramped up big time. It contends things escalated into straight-up mass killings, all designed to wipe out any remaining opposition for good.
And the first major event the article points to is the Jeju uprising. It frames this as a full-blown rebellion on Jeju Island against the forced division of Korea and the installation of Rhee's government. The response, described in the source, was just brutal, a scorched earth campaign. And the number it cites is staggering. Up to 30,000 people killed. That was 10% of the entire island's population. The article claims that American officers were actually directing the South Korean forces who carried this out.
Just 2 years later, right at the start of the Korean War, the article describes an even bigger atrocity, the Bodo League massacre. It says this was basically a preemptive slaughter. The goal was to execute tens of thousands of political prisoners and suspected leftists to make sure there'd be no internal support for the North.
The source puts the death toll for this and other related massacres as high as 200,000. And here's the kicker. Citing declassified documents, the article asserts that the U.S. knew all about it. It claims American officers were there, they witnessed it, and in some cases, even gave the green light for the killings.
I mean, this quote from the source material is just damning. It alleges that the very top of the U.S. command, including General MacArthur himself, knew about the mass murder and did nothing. The article's conclusion? They prioritized winning the war over stopping what it calls a counter-revolutionary genocide.
All right, let's jump forward a bit. After a short-lived democratic moment, a military coup in 1961 brings General Park Chung-hee to power. The article claims the U.S. quickly got behind this coup, seeing Park as the kind of strongman they needed to keep the country firmly anti-communist.
Park then made his power absolute with something called the Yushin Constitution. The source doesn't just call this authoritarian, it calls it textbook fascism, a system designed to serve U.S. interests by creating a totally stable pro-American police state and crushing any democratic hopes for a generation.
The article paints a grim picture of Park's 18-year rule. We're talking about an all-powerful secret police, the KCIA, known for torture. Independent labor unions? Banned. Dissent of any kind? Crushed. The regime even sent 300,000 Korean troops to fight in Vietnam, which the source basically calls a mercenary deal in exchange for American dollars.
So this is the really crucial point the article makes. You know that celebrated economic boom, the miracle on the Han River? Well, according to this source, it wasn't a miracle of the free market. It was built on the backs of exploited workers in a police state that suppressed their wages and rights, a system that Washington, it argues, actively propped up with aid and investment.
Okay, so after Park is assassinated in 1979, there's this glimmer of hope for democracy, but it's immediately stamped out by another military coup.
this time led by General Chun Do-hwan. And this sets the stage for one of the most tragic and important events in modern Korean history. The article walks through this incredible, unbelievable series of events in the city of Gwangju. It starts as a protest, but after a brutal crackdown, the citizens, they fight back. They arm themselves, drive the military out, and for a few days, they actually run the city. The source calls it a liberated zone, a people's commune. Just incredible.
And this is where the article claims, once again, direct U.S. complicity. You see, the South Korean military was operating under a joint command with the U.S., so moving troops to crush the uprising required American approval. The source argues that declassified documents prove the Carter administration gave that approval, effectively signing off on the bloody final assault to restore order.
Even though it was brutally crushed, the article argues that the memory of Gwangju didn't die. Far from it. It became this powerful symbol of resistance, a rallying cry that would fuel the successful democracy movement that finally emerged years later.
So, how does the source tie all of these events together? It wraps everything up with one final overarching analysis that brings it all back to its central thesis.
At the end of the day, the article's entire argument really boils down to these points. The claim is that U.S. policy was never about democracy. It was always about stopping a socialist Korea. The dictatorships weren't some unfortunate byproduct, they were the whole point. And the massacres? They weren't just political repression, but acts of class war to destroy the power of workers and peasants.
So this is the fundamental lens the source wants us to use. It's asking us to reframe this entire history. Stop seeing it as a simple fight between authoritarianism and democracy. Instead, it says we should see it as a decades-long war between U.S. imperialism and a popular class-based resistance movement.
And the article connects this history directly to right now. It points to the 28,000 U.S. troops still stationed in South Korea, not as a symbol of protection, but as the living legacy of the same intervention it claims began all the way back in 1945.
So, what does this all mean? Ultimately, the source is asking us to completely rethink the very foundation of the U.S.-South Korea relationship. It's a tough, challenging perspective for sure, and it leaves us with a pretty big question. How does changing our historical lens completely reshape how we understand a nation's story and its place in the world today?